When the world froze over, and everything we knew crumbled beneath the snow, I didn't have much, just this stubborn land and a will to survive. Name's Silas Thorn. I'm just a farmer, but out here, that's all that matters. This is my story, how I fought the cold, the silence, and the darkness to keep hope alive. The day before. I've lived alone on this 5-acre patch of land for the past 12 years. Ever since my divorce, I found more comfort in the rhythm of tending the earth than I ever did in crowds or city life. California, especially this far north near the mountains, has always had its quirks: dry summers, frost-dusted winters, and the occasional wild wind that made the pines sing. But nothing in all my years had prepared me for what started happening 3 weeks ago. The first sign was the birds. They didn't just fly south, they bolted as if chased by fire. I remember standing by the chicken coop, watching the sky darken with flocks, black wings beating faster than I'd ever seen. The animals noticed too. My goats stopped grazing mid-step, ears high, spooked by something I couldn't see or hear. Then came the cows. Usually calm, slow-moving creatures. They began pacing, mooing in restless tones, bumping into fences like they were trying to escape. I chalked it up to some freak storm system, maybe a magnetic anomaly, who knows. But inside, I felt it. Something was off. Deeply off. Yesterday, my old shortwave radio crackled to life with a broadcast out of Utah. The man's voice was flat with worry as he reported a sudden deviation in the Earth's magnetic pole. He said it calmly, like he didn't want to scare people, but then added the temperature predictions. Prepare for a rapid drop, potentially catastrophic. Reports from Canada already show a 20-degree dip in the past 12 hours. That got my attention. I turned off the tractor, walked straight back to the house, and started prepping. Now, it's today, the day before it all changes, and the temperature has already dipped below freezing. It's the middle of what used to be spring. My apple trees should be blooming, but instead, I'm covering them in burlap and hoping for the best. I checked my stores, 10 cords of wood split and stacked, thanks to my winter habit of chopping every morning before coffee. I've got propane for cooking, some canned goods, plenty of grains and lentils, and my old root cellar is packed with preserved goods from last season. There's even a small greenhouse near the south-facing wall, reinforced with thick plastic sheets. It may not save us in an ice age, but it might buy us time. The radio's been the only source of updates. Landline stopped working 2 days ago. Cell service? Long gone. I have a hand crank and solar charger for the radio, so as long as the sun doesn't vanish entirely, I can stay connected. But the man from Utah said this drop wasn't like any normal cold front. He said this was a beginning. That night, I barely sleep. I double insulate the windows with foam and old quilts, wrap the doors with towels. My dogs, Scout and Toby, curl close on either side of my bed like they know what's coming. At 3:22 a.m., the power goes out. I hear the hum of the fridge die, the click of the electric heater. I don't move. I just listen. The silence is thicker than usual. By sunrise, the thermometer on the porch reads -48 degrees Celsius. Day 1 after the drop. I woke up to a world that no longer made sense. The windows were iced over from the inside. The glass had grown thin white webs, and the air inside the house felt like the inside of a walk-in freezer. I checked the thermometer again, still hovering at -50 degrees Celsius. My breath fogged in the air like smoke. Even the dogs were shivering under their blankets. First things first, I needed heat. Thank God for the wood stove. A relic from the previous owner, it hadn't been used much in recent years, but I'd kept it cleaned and ready. I shoveled in some kindling and split pine, then lit it with trembling fingers. The match almost didn't catch. My breath was shallow, and my fingers were already stiff. But finally, a small flame caught. Then another. Within 5 minutes, the stove was crackling, radiating warmth like a small sun. The dogs came alive with the heat, pushing closer. I wrapped us in sleeping bags, quilts, whatever I could find. I had already moved most essentials into the main room last night: water jugs, cooking supplies, dry food, radio, my old 12-volt battery setup. The house was just big enough to insulate, but I knew I couldn't heat every room. I sealed off the bedrooms and bathroom. For now, this one room was our entire world. I put on my thickest clothes, thermal base layers, wool sweater, parka, gloves. Outside, the snow wasn't falling, but the air was still. Too still. Like nature was holding its breath. The greenhouse my next concern. I made the dash just after noon. Even layered up, the cold stabbed me. Not like wind chill, more like a solid wall of ice slamming into my chest. It hurt to breathe. I had to blink every few seconds to keep my eyes from freezing. The snow was knee-deep already, blown in fast by night winds. The greenhouse, thankfully, had survived. I checked the inside temp, just below zero. Not great, but not death for the hardier greens. I rolled out 2 emergency thermal blankets I had saved and taped them to the inside walls for insulation. The tiny propane heater I kept for emergencies was set up in the corner, and I lit it, praying the tank would last a few days. Back inside, I cranked the radio. Static, then a flicker of sound. Emergency update: this is Utah Station KTAV, broadcasting to anyone who can still hear. The Earth's magnetic axis has shifted by 4.1 degrees in the last 48 hours. We're entering what experts are calling a flash ice age. Most of the Midwest is already frozen over. Power grids have failed across 3 states. Stay indoors. Use fire or fuel-based heat. Do not rely on power restoration. Then the voice cut out. I sat back, letting the silence settle in. That was my only window to the outside world, and even that was falling apart. The sun never broke the clouds that day. By 3 p.m., it felt like dusk. I rationed food: oats with dried fruit for breakfast, canned soup for dinner. The stove ran hot all day. I used the top to melt snow I had scooped into pots. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled like a dying animal, pressing against the walls, testing the windows. The wood popped and snapped in the stove, and every sound seemed louder. I kept thinking, is this the beginning of the end? But I wasn't scared yet. I had food. I had heat. And I wasn't alone. Day 2: unexpected visitors. I heard the knocking around midday. It wasn't loud, not at first. More like a scraping at the door. For a second, I thought it was the wind again, tossing branches against the porch. But then I heard it again: 3 short knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Human. I grabbed my shotgun, not to threaten, just to be sure. Out here, in times like this, you don't open doors without caution. Scout was already at the door, ears alert, tail stiff. When I opened it, a gust of frigid wind tore through the room, and I saw them, 2 shapes wrapped in what looked like every coat and blanket they owned. "Please, can we come in?" the woman said, her voice shaking but steady. "Our car, it died a mile back. We've been walking since morning." She had short cropped dark hair, frosted with ice, and maybe 45, maybe older, it was hard to tell under the exhaustion. Beside her, a girl no older than 10 clung to her arm. Her cheeks were raw with cold, her nose bleeding slightly. She didn't cry. Just stared at me like an animal too tired to be afraid. "Come in," I said quickly, stepping aside. They stumbled in like falling trees. I slammed the door behind them, bolted it, then helped them out of their snow-crusted layers. They were both soaked through. The mother's hands were blue around the nails. The little girl had frostbite on her fingers. "Names?" I asked gently. "I'm Elena. This is my daughter, Mara." I led them to the stove, where Toby was curled. He gave one small bark, then settled again. Smart dog, he knew they weren't a threat. I gave them hot tea, wrapped them in dry blankets, set their clothes by the fire to dry. Mara finally spoke when I handed her a bowl of warm rice. "Is this your farm?" "Yeah. Been mine for a long time now." "Are we gonna freeze?" she asked, eyes wide and hollow. "Not if I can help it." Over the next hour, Elena told me everything. They were driving up from Sacramento when the cold front hit hard. Power went out on the road. Traffic lights froze. Then the car's battery died completely. The last thing they heard on the car radio was the same broadcast I'd picked up. They slept in the vehicle the first night. Tried to stay warm. But the second morning, the fuel line froze and cracked. They had no choice but to walk and saw smoke rising from my chimney. That smoke might have saved their lives. I gave Elena the spare room, cold but safe. I brought in a small propane heater from the barn and kept it going there at low flame. Mara slept in the main room with me and the dogs, closer to the fire. She fell asleep holding Scout's paw. That night, I turned the radio back on. Static again. But then like a ghost came a fragment. "Rescue operations, halted, extreme temperatures, stay in place." Then it vanished. I leaned back and listened to the wind outside, heavier than ever. I felt the weight of it now, not just the cold, but the enormity of it all. The world as we knew it was shutting down. And somehow, my 5 acres had become a tiny island in a frozen sea. Day 3, the hunt for warmth. Morning came without light, just a dull blue haze behind the frost-covered windows. It was hard to tell what time it was anymore without checking my wind-up watch. 7:14 a.m. Still dark. Still below -50 degrees Celsius. The fire had burned low overnight. I'd been waking up every couple of hours to feed it more wood, but I was down to 5 cords now. At this rate, we had maybe 10 days of burn left. Less, if the cold got worse. I boiled snow for water and cooked oats for all of us. Elena's hands were still stiff from the frostbite. She tried to help, but I waved her off. "Just stay warm." Mara was still quiet, but she smiled when Toby licked her hand. That dog had become her shadow. After breakfast, I bundled up and stepped out to the woodshed. The cold hit like a punch to the lungs, sharp and immediate. I moved fast, stacking as much wood as I could into the sled cart and dragging it back to the house. Every breath felt like breathing glass. Back inside, I peeled off layers and looked at my dwindling supplies. Propane, 2 tanks left. Canned food, good for a couple weeks. Battery power, enough for the radio, but not much else. Gasoline, 3 gallons in the barn, frozen solid for now. Elena sat near the fire, rubbing Mara's hands between hers. She looked up. "How long do you think we'll have to ride this out?" I didn't lie. "I don't know. But we'll make every day count." Around noon, I made a plan. The barn still had tools. Insulation material. Maybe some extra propane. I hadn't been out there since the cold snap began, and if the roof had held, it could be our backup supply. Elena insisted on coming with me. "We need to know what we're working with," she said. I didn't argue. We suited up: thermal socks, scarves, goggles. Mara stayed behind with the dogs and the fire. The walk to the barn was only about 200 yards, but it felt like a mile. Snow halfway to our waists. Wind biting through the smallest seam. We moved like astronauts, slow, deliberate. The barn creaked as we pushed the doors open. Inside, it was dark, cold, but still intact. I lit a lantern and we got to work. We found 1 unopened propane tank, score. A crate of emergency blankets I'd forgotten I owned. A pair of snowshoes, useful if the drifts kept rising. 3 large sacks of dried corn I'd planned to grind for feed. And tucked in the far corner, under a tarp, a portable generator. I grinned. Well, hello there. Of course, it needed gasoline. And the gas was frozen. But still, if we could warm the barn enough to thaw a can or two, we might have a way to power a space heater or even a light. We loaded what we could onto the sled and returned, frozen but hopeful. That evening, we sat close by the stove, the propane tank hissing softly in the background as it kept the back room warm. Elena finally spoke. We never thought it would be like this. One day it was spring. Next, the world was ending. I nodded. The earth doesn't care about our calendars. She gave a weak laugh. You're more prepared than most. Why'd you do it? All this prepping. I thought for a second. I guess I just liked the idea of surviving something no one else saw coming. Outside, the wind rose again. Snow piled against the door. But inside, we were alive. For another day, at least. Day 4 signs and signals. It was still snowing when I woke, though snowing didn't quite describe it anymore. It was like the sky had become a sieve for powdered glass. The wind was relentless, driving ice into every crack and crevice. Even the barn door had frozen shut again overnight. Inside, the fire had held. Barely. I'd burned through more wood than planned, and I could feel the weight of that loss in my chest. The warmth it gave was fleeting, but the fuel it cost me was permanent. After breakfast, more lentils and reheated cornbread, we sat by the stove in silence. Mara curled against the dogs again, wrapped in her blanket cocoon. Elena stood by the window, staring out into the pale gray world. We can't stay here forever, she said suddenly. I nodded. I'd been thinking the same. Then, as if summoned by her words, the radio crackled to life. We all turned to it, the static louder than usual, urgent somehow. Repeat, if you can hear this broadcast, this is a civil emergency transmission from Norcal Command. A temporary shelter zone has been established near Redding, California. Heat, medical assistance, and communications. Coordinates are 40.5865 degrees north, 122.3917 degrees west. Repeat, this is a confirmed safe zone. The signal faded into static again. We stared at each other in stunned silence. Redding. That was about 30 miles southeast. In normal times, maybe a 45-minute drive. Now, in these conditions, it's too far, Elena said softly. We'd never survive on foot. Not now, I agreed. But it means people are out there. There's a chance. And if the weather shifts, if it eases even a little. We had hope now. Thin, flickering, but real. That afternoon, I rigged the lantern with a reflective screen and aimed it through the front window, a makeshift beacon. If anyone else was out there, lost in this storm, they might see it. Mara helped me sort supplies. She was stronger today. More alert. Can we go there someday? To the safe place? Yes, I told her. But not until it's safer. Right now, this house is our fort. I showed her the map, traced the roadways frozen under snow. We marked the shelter in red ink, a tiny flame of possibility. Later, while Elena rested, I sat with the radio again, scanning bands. I heard only pieces: someone crying, a burst of static, a half sentence about Los Angeles submerged in snow. Then, faintly, a coded message, 5 short tones, repeating. A survivor signal. I wrote it down. If nothing else, it meant the network was still alive, frayed, but alive. That night, we spoke quietly by the fire. Elena told me she was a high school science teacher. Mara liked drawing, she said. She wanted to be an astronaut. Now she's getting a crash course in surviving an alien planet, Elena said, half smiling. We shared a laugh, but our eyes said different things. The laughter was armor. We knew what tomorrow could bring. Still, we had a beacon in the window, a full stove, and a new dot on the map. And for tonight, that was enough. Day 5, a fire in the distance. The cold wasn't letting up. If anything, it was settling in like a tenant who'd decided to stay. The sun hadn't broken through the clouds in 5 days now. The trees around the property groaned under the weight of ice. Even the dogs, restless at first, had gone quiet. Instincts kicking in. This wasn't weather they knew. This was threat. By noon, the temperature outside had fallen even further. The old thermometer on the porch stopped at -58 degrees Celsius. I didn't know if that was accurate or if the mercury had frozen altogether. Then it happened. I was out at the greenhouse, checking on the last of the greens, most of which were dying despite the propane heater, when I saw it. A glow. Faint, orange-red, far across the valley, near the ridge line. I froze. It wasn't the sun. Not a chance. It was a fire. I radioed back into the house on my short-range hand unit. "Elena, come out back. Bring the binoculars." She joined me 5 minutes later, bundled in her thickest coat, breath fogging. I pointed to the ridge, and after a moment of scanning, she found it. "You think it's another house?" she asked. "Could be. Or an explosion. Maybe a fuel tank. Could be a signal. Could be someone freezing to death with their last can of gas." We stared at it for a while. It flickered but didn't move. "Not wildfire, not in this cold." "I want to check it out," I said. Elena shook her head. "It's too far. And too dangerous." "Not today," I said. "But tomorrow, if it's still burning." That night, the firelight stayed on the horizon, pulsing like a distant heartbeat. Inside, we huddled close. I reinforced the window seals with extra insulation and old towels. We ate slowly, just soup and half a biscuit each. The food wouldn't last forever. Mara asked what the fire was. I didn't lie. "Could be people. Could be trouble. But we're safe here for now." She nodded, then went to draw in the notebook I'd given her. Her drawing was of the house, with warm light in the windows, and the big dog beside her. When I asked what she called it, she said, "Home." Later, I turned on the radio again. Static. Then, something clearer than before. "Supply drops, only in southern Oregon and limited northern California, visibility poor, survivors advised to shelter in place until midweek storm passes, confirmation of magnetic pole instability continues. Estimated timeline for temperature stabilization, unknown." The voice was calm, and too rehearsed. But there was a word I latched onto. Midweek. They expected something to change by midweek. Hope. I sat by the fire long after the others had gone to bed, watching the faint red glow outside the window. The world was frozen solid, yes. But something out there was burning. And come morning, I needed to know if it meant salvation or danger. Day 6, into the white. I left at first light. If you can call it light, more like a dull gray smear over the hills. I packed carefully: flare gun, small hatchet, thermal blankets, a rifle, 1 thermos of hot tea, 2 protein bars, and the hand radio. I strapped the snowshoes to my boots, and Scout, ever loyal, insisted on coming. I didn't argue. He was half wolf and twice as smart as most men. Elena tried to talk me out of it. "We have no idea who or what is out there." "That's exactly why I need to go," I said. "If it's help, we might need it. If it's trouble, better I find out before it finds us." Mara handed me one of her drawings before I left. It was me and Scout standing on a hill, the fire in the distance. She'd written in big letters across the bottom, "Come back soon." I folded it carefully and tucked it into my coat. The first mile was brutal. The wind fought every step, and the snow came up past my knees, even with the shoes on. I used an old hiking pole for balance, and Scout led, pressing a track through the powder. The silence was maddening. No birds, no aircraft, no movement, just the sound of my breath and the crunch of ice. It took me nearly 2 hours to reach the ridge. The fire was no longer aglow. It was real now, orange and alive, just beyond the next tree line. As we crested the hill, I finally saw the source. It wasn't a house. It was a bus. An old, modified school bus, its windows covered in metal grates, tires buried in snow. Smoke rose from a chimney welded into its roof. Around it, a makeshift camp. Tents half collapsed. Tarps frozen in place. Snowmobiles buried like fossils. And people. 4 of them, all in heavy winter gear, moving slowly but deliberately. They hadn't seen me yet. I raised the rifle, not in threat, just caution. Scout growled low in his throat. A man turned. He saw us. He raised a hand. "Friend or foe?" he called. "Friend," I shouted back. I descended slowly. When I got close enough, I slung the rifle over my back and held my hands out. The man nodded. "You're the one from the house across the valley, aren't you? We saw the chimney smoke." "Yeah. Saw your fire 2 nights ago." He extended a gloved hand. "I'm Don. That's Carla, Jason, and the old guy's Bill." "You alone?" "No, 2 more at my place. Woman and her daughter. They came in from Sacramento." "Lucky for them," he said. "Not many made it that far." They invited me inside the bus. It was surprisingly warm, 2 kerosene heaters going at once, and a hot plate cooking some kind of broth. Inside were survival kits, radios, dried food, weapons. They weren't just survivors. They were preppers. They'd driven the bus up here from Chico just as the collapse started. Reinforced it, stocked it. The tents had been for others who joined them along the way. But most of those had moved on, headed toward Redding when the first rescue broadcasts came through. "But no one's heard back from them," Carla said quietly. "Those who went out never radioed in again." Bill grunted. "Snow eats everyone these days." I asked about the shelter in Redding. "It's real," Don said. "But they're only letting in those who make it in the first wave. Too much risk of disease. Or panic. You have to prove you can contribute. And you're staying here. For now. We're trying to boost the signal range on our radio. Pick up anything out of Oregon or Nevada. But batteries are dying fast." He looked at me. "You've got heat. Food. Shelter. That's gold. Hold on to it." Before I left, they offered me supplies, blankets, a roll of copper wire, a backup hand crank radio. "Use it daily," Don told me. "Even if it sounds dead. Some signals come only once." I gave them one of my old farm maps with a pencil marked route to my house. "If things go south here, come find us. You'll be welcome." They nodded. Then Scout and I turned back into the white. It took me nearly 3 hours to return. I was shaking from the cold, but still standing. Elena met me at the door, helped strip off my soaked clothes, got me tea. I told her everything. About the bus. The people. The realness of the Redding shelter. And the warning. "We're on our own," I said. "But we're not the only ones." Day 7, a break in the sky. I woke before dawn to silence. Not the thick, smothering kind we'd gotten used to, but a clean silence, the kind that comes after a storm has passed. No wind howled through the eaves. No snow whipped against the windows. Just the soft hiss of the fire and the steady breath of 2 sleeping dogs by the hearth. I opened the door. And for the first time in over a week, I saw the sky. It was pale blue. Clear. The sun, just a muted white disk, hung low behind a veil of cloud, but it was visible. Tangible. And for a few brief minutes, I could feel the temperature shifting. From brutal cold to something just, very cold. It was maybe minus 35 degrees Celsius. Still deadly, but survivable for longer stretches. You could breathe without pain. You could think clearly. I let the door hang open just long enough to take it in, then shut it before the warmth could bleed out. Elena was already up. The wind stopped, she said. I smiled. Yeah. And it might be our window. We spent the morning wisely. With the better weather, we could finally dig out the south-facing greenhouse fully. Elena and I took turns chipping ice off the panels. The solar batteries miraculously still held some charge. Enough to power a low-watt heater and a few grow lights. Inside, a few of the hardiest greens had survived. Kale. Some spinach. A couple of potato sprouts. Not much. But something. By midday, we heard the radio again. Clearer than before. Repeat, temperature drop has stabilized temporarily. Aerial drops have resumed between Northern California and Southern Oregon. Survivors advised to remain sheltered and signal with any reflective surface or beacon for drone detection. Drones, Elena said. That's how they're scanning for survivors. I nodded. That's how they're choosing who gets picked up. We wasted no time. I retrieved an old reflective tarp I used to scare off birds from the orchard. We tied it across the roof of the barn, angled upward, then set a battery-powered lantern behind it to blink in slow intervals. Elena also had the idea to use my old welding mirror to catch the light when the sun rose higher. It's not much, she said, brushing snow from her eyelashes, but it's a scream in the silence. Mara came outside for the first time in days. She stood beside us in the cold for a few minutes, looking up. Do you think they'll see us? She asked. Yes, I said. She believed me. So I made myself believe it too. That night, the three of us sat around the fire closer than usual. The dogs lay between us, all heat and heart. I brought out my last jar of honey and split it among 3 cups of tea. A celebration, I said. For still being here. The quiet that followed was a grateful one. Elena finally asked, what if no one comes? Then we still have each other, I said. And this place. And another day. Outside, the snow no longer fell. The trees stood still. And high above the valley, in a sky cold and unfamiliar, the stars finally began to show again, sharp, clear, endless. Day 8. The drone. We heard it just after noon. A faint, mechanical hum, not the wind, not an animal, not anything natural. It was distant at first, like the sound of a mosquito in a tunnel. Then louder. Rising. I stepped out into the cold without thinking, scanning the sky. The snow had stopped completely by now, and the air was still, brittle with frost but clear. And there it was. A drone. Not one of the tiny hobby ones. This was a military-grade surveillance drone. Triprop, matte gray, the size of a small car, hovering slow and low like it was searching for something. Elena and Mara came out behind me, bundled in every piece of warm clothing they owned. Mara shielded her eyes against the brightness bouncing off the snow. There, she pointed. It's flashing. She was right. A red light blinked from its underbelly in a slow, regular rhythm, 3 quick blinks, a pause, then 2 more. Repeat. It's scanning, I said. Looking for movement. Reflective surfaces. Life signs. We raced to the barn, where the tarp still hung across the roof. I angled the mirror with shaking hands, catching a beam of sunlight and bouncing it up, toward the drone. Elena grabbed the flare gun. Do we risk it? I nodded. Do it? She fired into the sky a bloom of red against the pale blue. The drone hesitated mid-air, then turned, its nose tilting slightly toward us. Then came the sound we hadn't heard in a week. A voice. "Identify yourself." It crackled from a speaker beneath the drone. I scrambled for the radio, tuned it to the open emergency band. "This is Thomas Hale. 5 miles northwest of Red Bluff. 3 survivors. Shelter intact. We have food, water, heat." A pause. Then the voice again, louder this time. "Message received. Rescue not currently available. Continue shelter in place. Supply drop incoming. Confirm with flare or beacon." I fired another flare. Scout barked once loud and clear as if punctuating the signal. The drone hovered for a moment longer. Then it moved off, slow and steady, climbing higher. Minutes later, from above the ridge, we saw it. A parachute, white and orange, drifting down from a second drone. We ran. The supply pack was small but sealed tight. Inside, 2 thermal blankets. 3 MREs, meals ready to eat. A solar-powered hand radio. 1 compact water filtration unit. A handwritten message. "Stay warm. Help is coming. Norcal Air Unit 3. That night, the fire burned hotter than usual, not because of the wood, but because of the hope. We split one of the MRE's beef stew and it tasted like victory. Mara smiled for the first time in days with her mouth full of real, hot food. Elena kept rereading the handwritten note. We weren't forgotten. They knew we were here. Later, as I sat on the porch, Scout beside me and the last flare gun cradled in my lap, I looked up at the sky. Stars again. Cold, distant, but visible. And I realized, we hadn't been waiting to be rescued. We had already rescued ourselves. Day 9, a choice to make. The snow began to melt. Not fast, just barely. But it was enough. A thin sheen of water clung to the south-facing window panes, and the icicles hanging from the porch roof dripped a steady rhythm. Like a ticking clock, counting down to something we didn't fully understand. Mara was the first to say it out loud. "Spring is coming." We exchanged looks. I wasn't ready to call it that just yet. But yes, the weather had broken. The earth, for now, was breathing again. The radio crackled mid-morning. "Rescue convoys en route along I-5 corridor, approaching Red Bluff, expected arrival within 24 hours, survivors, prepare for possible evacuation." I sat back, stunned. I looked over at Elena. She said nothing, just closed her eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. We had survived 8 days of extreme cold. We'd kept the fire alive. We'd rationed food, outwitted the freeze, and even reached other humans through the snow. And now we had a choice. We gathered that afternoon, me, Elena, Mara, Scout, and Toby around the fire. It was still our hearth. The flames flickered gently, not with desperation now, but with peace. "I need to ask," I said. "If the convoy comes, are you both going with them?" Elena looked at Mara, then back at me. "I want what's best for her," she said. "And for her, that's probably structure. Safety. School. Friends. And you?" I asked. She was quiet. Then, "I'm tired, Tom. But this place gave us something no shelter can. Time to believe we could survive. I won't forget that." She turned to me. "What about you?" I looked around the room. My farmhouse. My dogs. My land. The cold had almost taken everything from me, but in the end, it had given me something too. A sense of purpose again. People to care for. A reason to keep the fire burning. "I think I'll stay," I said. The convoy arrived the next morning. 3 snow-modified military trucks. One drone overhead. Loudspeakers calling out survivor codes. I led Elena and Mara down the path, their bags packed, hands holding tight. We hugged. Mara whispered, "Thank you for saving us." I handed her the notebook she'd drawn in. "Keep drawing. Tell the story." She smiled and tucked it into her coat. Elena turned before boarding. "You sure?" "I'll be fine," I said. "If you ever come back this way, there'll be hot tea and a warm fire waiting." She nodded. "You're one hell of a stubborn man." "I've been called worse." I watched them go, the trucks grinding off into the melting frost. Then I turned back toward the farmhouse. The dogs followed me up the hill. Smoke rose from the chimney. The greenhouse stood quiet but alive. I walked into the house, fed the stove, sat down with my radio. I tuned it again, listening for signals. Not because I needed rescue anymore, but because someone else out there might. And I'd be ready.